Hi, this is Claudia Files with the New Alexandria Foundation, and I'm so delighted to be joined here today by Professor Naomi Weiss of Harvard University and Professor Gregory Nagy of Harvard University, and all of our wonderful community members. And today we're going to be talking about the Bacchae performance and podcasting because Naomi is our very special guest. And before we get going, I just want to tell you a little bit about the New Alexandria Foundation. Our mission is to expand access to the comparative study of civilizations, both ancient and modern. And our vision is to bring together technology and community to foster dialogues that are open to all and that will endure across generations. So that's what we're doing here at the New Alexandria Foundation, and we're eager to build community and to have public-facing events to fulfill our mission. So today I want to welcome Naomi. Naomi, thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited for this conversation.
Awesome. I want to share with the community a little bit more about you, Naomi. You're the professor of classics at Harvard University. You're originally from Cambridge, England, and you were educated at the University of Oxford and the University of California, Berkeley. You're really primarily a scholar of archaic and classical Greek literature and culture, and you're the author of and editor of multiple books. I'll just share a few. One is The Music of Tragedy, Performance and Imagination in Euripidean Theater. Another is Seeing Theater, the Phenomenology of Classical Greek Drama, which was awarded the 2024 Goodwin Award of Merit from the Society of Classical Studies. You're also the co-editor of Genre in Archaic and Classical Greek Poetry, Theories and Models, and Music and Memory in the Ancient Greek and Roman World. Currently, you're working on a new commentary on Euripides Orestes and an edited volume, Cultural Poetics in Ancient Greece, New Directions, and a short monograph entitled Tragic Repetition. And you're also a series co-editor of Cambridge Elements in Greek and Roman Drama and Performance. So you're a very busy person. So we're just delighted you're taking the time to speak with us today. And one reason we're speaking with you today is something I didn't even mention, which is that you are the creator and the host of the podcast Ancient Greece Today, which is hosted in collaboration with the Center for Hellenic Studies, which is an organization we're just so delighted to have partnerships with, and hope to do more partnerships with in the future. So, Naomi, again, we're delighted to have you.
Thank you so much. And I'm really delighted to talk about the Bacchae. I'm always delighted to talk about the Bacchae, and really delighted that you have listened to this podcast, which is a sort of a great experiment, my first foray into public humanities. And so I'm very happy to talk about the play itself, Euripides Bacchae, its some of its receptions and adaptations, but also this sort of podcasting adventure that I've been on.
Yeah. So, you know what? I want to start with something that actually first draws from a book, and it's the acknowledgement to your book, Music and Tragedy. And in that, you thank your parents for always asking interesting questions. And so, as a new podcaster, that is sort of one of your roles now, to be asking interesting questions. And also, as a scholar, of course, you're always doing that. So, I just wanted to ask you first, what was the question that first drew you towards Greek tragedy? And what kinds of questions are you finding most interesting now?
Oh gosh, I find these kind of origin story questions really hard to answer.
That's okay.
Um, I will say, yes, I'm touched that you saw the acknowledgements for my first book. And that was a very sincere acknowledgement of, about asking interesting questions. I went on several long family vacations camping all around Greece when I was little, which probably first inspired me to sort of think about that part of the world. But in terms of and to sort of ask questions about it, and so I'm in debt to my parents for that. But in terms of tragedy, I always loved acting when I was a kid. So I came up from a kind of amateur dramatics background. When I first started learning ancient Greek at college, I went through, I thought Homer was going to be it. And then I started reading Euripides. and then Aeschylus finally at sort of master's level, and very quickly became interested in issues of performance, particularly questions of how we can access performance, ancient performance, from the silent texts that remain, and how we can even think about performance when we only have these texts. And that led me to questions about the relationship between language and performance, which really has those questions have persisted in my work ever since. But I do think that that background in amateur dramatics probably fed into that. And the very first sort of serious research question I approached when it came to Greek tragedy concerned Aeschylus's Seven Against Thebes, which is an extraordinary play about Eteocles, one of the two sons of Oedipus, who is defending his city against his brother Polynices, who's attacking it. And the two armies come together. In the end, both brothers die, they kill each other. But the thing I was really interested in that play was the fact that it's full of sound words. And so I was really sort of trying to understand how we could even approach all these descriptions of sound in a silent text and how those might relate to questions about the original performance, but also the sort of potentiality of performance.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for helping us understand that. I think so those ideas about sound, that's making me think right away about something we heard in this episode. So just to remind the community, if you're just joining this video, let's say on YouTube in times to come, one of the things we asked our community to do in preparation for this discussion was to listen to episode 7 of Ancient Greece Today, of season 1, because I'm sure there'll be many seasons. And in that, one of your guests actually does some beautiful reading, right? Can you talk us through that moment? Because that was really you really get a sense of the powerfulness of the sounds and the rhythm of coming, for a chorus.
Yes. So so Ancient Greece Today, as I assume the people in this Zoom room know, but I'll just sort of say anyway, is this experiment in trying to bring tragedy, but also in due course other Greek texts to a broader audience, not just by talking with scholars of classic scholars, but also by talking with artists who have made use of, who have adapted these works themselves. And this season is focused on tragedy, and for the most part, each episode has been on a particular play, and I've talked with a scholar and then with an artist. In my discussion with Dr. Lucy Jackson, who is at Durham University, well, first of all, I should say that I was really looking forward to the discussion with her because it's not just that I like her work. She's done a lot of work on choruses, but she's heavily involved in the National Theatre in London, and does a lot of archival work there and is a consultant for their many productions of Greek dramas. And so she seemed perfect as an interlocutor for the Bacchae, which is a play that's so deeply about theatrical performance. And so here is somebody who's always thinking in those terms and is also very cued into modern adaptations. And then there's a moment which was extraordinary for me when I was interviewing her, where it turned out she had memorized way back the entire one of the odes in the Bacchae. And she's just started reading it out loud in order to demonstrate the powerful impact of meter at this particular moment when when Pentheus has gone off to the mountains to spy on the woman his mother, his aunts, and we're all waiting to see what is going to happen, and we know it's going to be bad. And the chorus kind of intensifies that sense of fear and dread, and she shows that they can do that through the rhythm. So that was a really exciting moment for me. I've never learnt these odes to be able to read them out in that way to show the power of the Dochmiac, but she has. And then there is another reading, I should say, in this episode, which is very different, which is by the poet Monica Youn, where she reads out her response to the Bacchae, study of two figures, agave slash Pentheus. But that is maybe a separate, related but separate conversation.
Yeah. I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit about that part of the episode before we, open up to the community questions about the Bacchae, because there was something that really resonated with me, a phrase that she used in her discussion with you. And she talked about that in the frenzy of belonging, agave kills her son. And so I guess that phrase, I just couldn't shake it. And I was wondering if you feel like there's something about the joy of belonging that I think we can all resonate with. But in that same moment, that act of creating belonging, there's also an act of creating otherness. And there's kind of an explosive dangerousness to that at times. And I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about how the Bacchae is exploring that.
Yeah, that is an amazing phrase that Monica used, in a frenzy of belonging. Um, yeah, one of the many interesting things about the Bacchae and about Dionysus in the Bacchae is how he's both from elsewhere and very much from here. He's both coming from Asia, and he is also fundamentally a Greek god. Um, he encourages rites that could be understood in terms of intense belonging, but also for a figure like Pentheus, are something to shun and something to feel alienated by. So I think that this sort of tension between being from elsewhere, being from here, belonging, not belonging, inviting in and rejecting, that those dynamics are very, very strong. And then they work so well in Monica Youn's reworking of or response to the play, where she is exploring experiences of assimilation or not,
Yes.
experiences of Asianness in America. So in the poem, which is a beautiful piece that I'm still grappling with myself, she the speaking voice is that of a mother, sort of witnessing her son adopting a white mask.
Right. And kind of refusing in the beginning a belongingness, right,
Mm,
to
mhm,
their community.
mhm.
And this idea of this refusal, I want to come back to this a few other times. And I just want to point out that that reading that she does is so beautiful. So I hope people will take the chance, if you have not yet listened to the episode, episode 7 of Ancient Greece. I hope people will go back and listen to that. So I want to take a moment. Can we open this up for questions already? Because I just feel like we have so many people here, and does anyone have something they would like to contribute? Especially, I'd like to invite Greg, and I saw Holly, and Bill and Sarah. We have so many wonderful community members here. Okay, Greg, please.
This is not a comment, not a question, but I'm so enjoying this dialogue. And,
Awesome.
and I have nothing to say. I'm in awe.
Uh, well, all right, hold on, Greg. I want you to stand by because I have a question I'd like to propose that kind of puts some things our community has been thinking about over the years in conversation with the back guy. Okay, so I think something our community has thought a lot about over the years is the idea and the motif of Nostos, of homecoming. And we've thought about Greg's work on this, we thought about Douglas Frame's work on this, And in that context, our community has really thought about Nostos not just as a homecoming or a song of homecoming, but also as a return to light and life. Um, and I was really struck this time when reading the Bacchae about that first word of the text, which is basically, I have come, I have arrived. And there's just something, there's so many aspects of a Nostos narrative that we get in this drama, things like disguise, recognition, the return. I mean, even those first lines, he kind of talks about where he has come from. So even the journey is implied, but it starts with this moment of kind of a return homecoming because this is the land of his mother, right? These are the people who should recognize him. These should be his people. They should recognize him as a god and as a person, as their own. And it doesn't happen. And that refusal, again, like we're getting back to the idea, just leads to so much horror. I'm just wondering, is there a way in which there's this that tragedy is allowing this dark mirror version of a Nostos narrative, and and then it's so suited to tragedy because there's something about perspective, right? I mean, if you think about a Nostos narrative, it's it's triumphant depending on who you are in the story. If you are Telemachus in the Odyssey, Odysseus's return is triumphant. If you're the one of the women in his household who gets slaughtered, this is not a triumphant return. Do you know what I mean? It's a horror film. Um, it seems to me something like the Bacchae is so truly horrific in a way that some other dramas, not that I have not deeply invested in, or I haven't studied them to the depth that you have, obviously. Um, but it really is disturbing. Um, and it's just this dark mirror version. Does that resonate at all, or what are your thoughts? And this is for everyone too, Naomi. Yeah.
Well, I'll offer a few thoughts, but then I would love to hear from other people,
Yeah.
including Greg. Uh, yes, I mean, it's actually a great way of thinking about tragedy, I think, in terms of the sort of Nostos gone wrong or perverted Nostos, because there are a lot of tragedies where somebody returns home and it goes really, really badly.
Right.
But usually it goes really badly for the person coming home. So think of Agamemnon slaughtered by his wife. um, you think of Heracles as well, whether, yeah, there are various versions of his coming home, but also they go really badly. Um, in this case, it's a sort of co coming home but it's of a god.
Right.
And so I think your description of the play as a kind of, it's almost like a horror movie, is apt because the horror is inflicted on the people who don't accept him as he comes home, but they also don't accept him as son of Zeus, as a god. The other thing I'll just quickly say is that kind of language of I have arrived, I've come, it recurs throughout the tragedy, and it's very epiphanic. You could think of the whole play being about Dionysus, the god of theatre, appearing on stage. Dionysus himself has, we all in the theatre have this epiphany, this experience of the epiphany, that is Dionysus there on stage. So he's arrived from elsewhere here to this city in the dramatic context. He's also the god of theatre and is sort of played by an actor, sure, but has arrived. And this play is full of choral song and dance that's all about Dionysus's birth, his history. You could even think of the entire play as in terms of, yeah, just Dionysus's arrival and his epiphany.
Mm, mm. Um, Greg, what's coming up for you?
Well, here's something that will amuse Naomi, that I go so far back in studying the classics that when I was young, um, everybody thought that Dionysus was a new god. And then in the 1950s, Linear B was deciphered, and it turns out that Dionysus is in linear B texts already as the recipient of sacrificial honors. And so, wow, this takes us back to the later centuries of the second millennium BCE. So he's as old as the hills, and yet this old myth is already saying that Dionysus is new. So the newness of Dionysus is part of the old myth. But in a sense, dear Naomi, it's a lesson for us classicists that you're so lucky because you're post-linear B, but I started pre-linear B.
As
And
it
so I
were.
thought, hey, Dionysus is a new god because the myth keeps insisting he's new, he's new, he's new.
Hmm. So, I mean, doesn't ritual do that also? Kind of the return, the epiphany, it is always new, right? I mean, is that something that is just sort of extra neon highlighted for Dionysus, but that should really is sort of present in general?
So I'd love to hear Naomi on this because Naomi, you're so good at bringing out the novelty of Dionysus, even as he manifests himself. He is so new, and yet he is so old.
Huh.
Yeah, new and old and in every respect hard to pin down, as I think that was the phrase Lucy uses in the podcast, hard to categorize. I mean, of course, with any I feel ridiculous saying this when Greg is here, but with any ritual performance, so say choral song and dance that's about a god, there is a way in which that God is being sort of made present in the here and now. So even if Dionysus weren't there as a character on stage, the choral song and dance in this play is sort of so insistent on his presence that he's really there, and there's a newness about that. And then he is in fact also arriving as a new God, but also the old God that comes from this place. Yeah, every aspect of this play, I think, is playing with that tension. You can see there are multiple questions now.
Oh, yes, great. Please.
I just have a comment.
Yes.
A question comment? Doesn't Dionysus also dress very exotically and in a very feminine way?
Yes, yes.
And isn't it? I just remember him, and I can't really remember him because I read the Bacchae 100 years ago and only once. But I do remember him being described as having long flowing, everything that Greeks don't have. Non-bearded, long flowing hair, silks, turbans.
Yeah,
Ish.
exactly. And this is for Pentheus in the Bacchae. This is yet another example of how other this person is,
Exactly.
that he's come from elsewhere. He's an effeminate foreigner. He fits all the stereotypes of the Easterner that was so common at this point in 5th century
And
Athens.
yet he is as old as the hills and has been around a long time and the son of Zeus.
Exactly, exactly. And images of Dionysus on Greek pottery have this too. He tends to wear these exotic robes, I should say, in sort of quotation marks, because they're also not they are who Dionysus is.
Mhm.
Um, uh, yeah, and he always tends to have long hair, and sometimes looks, except for the beard, sort of as almost equivalent to the maenads that he faces. So
Oh, he
yeah,
does have a beard in pottery. He's bearded.
he can be bearded.
He can't be. I remember Charlie By when we were reading the back. I basically described him as a drag queen.
Hmm. Hmm.
Okay, enough from me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you, Holly. That was a great question. Anna, I see your hand is up.
Yes, I thought the idea that you brought up about Nostos is fascinating, and it kind of mixes with a lot of different concepts about the question of identity, for example, and we're talking about an old and a new Dionysus, and Dionysus is full of contradiction because it's an irrational god in a way. So his very identity is at stake. He's never the same. So in returning in coming home in the Nostos, there's always this kind of displacement of an old identity that whoever returns is never the same. So I don't know how to juggle all these ideas, but I find it fascinating that there's something there that wasn't fully articulated in the notion of Nostos. And I think it's something very fascinating that should be explored and taken into account the sameness that is presupposed in a way, the question of identity, which Dionysus challenges in his very being. So more of a jumble of questions.
No, he does. Dionysus's identity itself is, or as the stranger for Pentheus, is hard to pin down because he straddles so many different ones. And one of the things I particularly like about the Bacchae is how he is bestial as well as human and divine. He sort of goes across all levels. Pentheus thinks that he's locking up a bull. In addition to the sort of male, female, Greek, foreign sort of confusion. But that's really interesting to sort of try to tie that to the idea of Nostos, which is usually a sort of reassertion of coming back to a more stable, or to resuming a more stable identity. And Dionysus is not like that at all. In fact, embracing him is to embrace all of these different facets of him.
Awesome. I think we had another hand up. Was it Mariana?
Hi, yes.
Hello.
Is a question, an idea coming back with this idea of clothing. I was thinking about a moment of the cross-dressing of Pentheus inside a tragedy. It maybe can be as an element that can be understood as ritualistic in itself, like an initiation process, because it's like a crucial point in the tragedy when the cross-dressing happens and all that is the outcome of that element. And it made me think about cross-dressing in ritual and in specific initiation rituals in ancient Greece. So I would like to know what Naomi thinks about it.
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. There is some evidence of I'm pausing on the phrase cross-dressing, which I know wouldn't seem like the right phrase for some people. There is evidence of cross-dressing in ritual contexts, especially for coming of age contexts, in some parts of Greece, and so people have wondered whether that's at all in play here. Certainly, however far we go along that route, it's certainly part of Pentheus sort of submitting to Dionysus, but at the same time, it's not presented as something he completely should be doing. You know, it's this sort of awful, perverted, almost extreme scene of his putting on woman's clothes that is going to lead to his demise. So it's really hard to think through. I'm finding it hard to think through how much of that is meant to evoke a sort of ritualistic cross-dressing beyond Athens versus it's being experienced as something that's deeply disturbing in the moment.
Do we have any other questions? Sarah.
Yeah, in the podcast, you were talking a little bit about different versions and presentations of Dionysus. And I was recalling the Homeric hymn to Dionysus. And there are some similarities, I'm thinking, but I wondered whether there was whether that had influenced Euripides. Holly talked about the long flowing hair, and that's mentioned. There's changing into an animal and not being bound, able to be bound. He gets loose from his bonds. And then there's a transformation, although it's a rather more positive one than Pentheus gets. Was there any influence from the Homeric hymn, do you think?
Here's another point where I'd love to hear what Greg thinks. I wouldn't say necessarily there's a direct influence. So thank you, by the way. It's a wonderful question. I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a direct influence of the hymn on the Bacchae, just because these elements of Dionysus are there for Dionysus across multiple media and genres. So we don't need to sort of posit a direct connection with this one piece, even while it encapsulates key elements of Dionysus, as you say, these kind of shape-shifting elements, turning into dolphins, men turning into dolphins, all of this sort of stuff. That's all wonderfully Dionysian, and the Bacchae fits that. One of the problems with our having just a tiny fraction of the many, many tragedies that were performed in Athens in the 5th century is that we've lost all the other versions of Dionysus on stage, that where maybe we could posit a direct link, a direct line from one of those to Euripides's Bacchae. But there are other fragments of other plays that I think might have especially been in Euripides's mind. So one in particular is the Edonians by Aeschylus, where there's a king like Kyrgus, who's a bit like a Pentheus figure. And we even have a line from that play where he's asking, who is this sort of man-woman, in response to Dionysus. So there clearly are some direct influences on Euripides, not just the sort of the general idea of or experience of Dionysus. The Homeric hymn is part of that broader experience.
Part of the same tradition then. And in a similar way, if we're looking at the vase paintings of Pentheus being torn apart, some of which predate the drama, they're drawing on the tradition, but aren't necessarily directly related to each other.
Exactly. Thank you.
That is beautiful. Gail, I see your hand is raised. Hi, Gail, would you like to ask a question? Oh, okay, maybe not, but if it comes back up, we'd love to have your question at a later point. So, I mean, we've already talked about so much. That's amazing. You know what I'm really thinking about now, Naomi? I don't know why what's really coming up for me at the moment is something from a different episode. Is it okay with the community if I ask a question from a different episode, okay? And it's relevant to what we're discussing. So I think it's the first episode of your podcast. You talk about one of your favorite moments in tragedy right now, because things that you're working through and things you have thought about too in the past is the moment when Electra is met by the chorus, and she kind of refuses to, and she's like, don't talk. She's telling the chorus to be quiet. And I think the phrase uses, don't even be a chorus. And so I'm just wondering about that moment of refusal in the context of our conversation here. I mean, there are times when refusal is absolutely catastrophic, and there are times when it's not, and when it allows participants in the tragedy to accomplish important things, and it doesn't necessarily lead to tragedy. But so I'm thinking about that, and I'm also thinking about the kind of flexibility in that conversation. You talk about there's a certain kind of flexibility with the chorus, that it gives the authors a chance to it's not necessarily so rigid, right? There's not necessarily just a one voice, a one unified dance, one unified song, that there's a flexibility that is there. So I was just wondering about that moment of flexibility, of refusal, and about the flexibility in the way that the chorus functions in tragedy.
Thank you. Thanks for listening to these episodes. It's really an odd experience to record a lot of these things sort of solo by myself and then realize that other people are hearing them. Yeah, so in that first episode, I talk about this. There are lots of extraordinary scenes in Euripides' Orestes, which you might say is the most experimental Greek tragedy out there. But one of them is when the chorus wants to perform its entrance song, but Electra doesn't want the chorus to wake up her sleeping brother Orestes. So they keep trying to sing, and she says, "Shut up, be quiet, don't be." And this is why I said she's sort of asking them not to be a chorus at all. What's amazing about, there are various amazing things about Orestes, but what might be especially interesting for us to consider is that Orestes dates to 408 BCE. So it's also a really, really late play by Euripides. And the Bacchae is a few years later. It's his latest. It's posthumously produced. And a play like Orestes really encourages us to think about how the chorus can be actually much more flexible than we might at first think. And this is what my interlocutor for that conversation in the first episode, Professor Rosa Andujar, who's at Columbia, has emphasized in her book, which came out last year, where she's encouraging us to think not just in terms of fixed choral odes that regularly break up the action but don't do much else, but actually to notice the workings of the chorus in other ways. They're lyric dialogues, astrophic songs, so songs that don't have sort of strophe, antistrophe, but are actually much more varied. And yeah, to think about their presence throughout a drama rather than just in this sort of fixed way. So to think of them, as you say, as flexible. In the Bacchae, however, we have a chorus that in many ways seems like a very traditional chorus. If we were to think about early Greek tragedy, we might in fact imagine a play like the Bacchae, which is kind of all of it feels a bit like a cult song for Dionysus. And we have these long choral numbers and that sort of regularly break up the action. So it might feel a bit more sort of fixed. It certainly does, I think, for a modern reader, if not an audience of the play. However, even in this play, you can see some sort of really interesting flexibility, maybe not refusal, but flexibility when it comes to what the chorus can do. So beyond the big choral odes that they sing, the chorus has this extraordinary exchange at the end of one of them that I talk about a bit in episode 7 with Lucy Jackson, an extraordinary exchange with Dionysus, where Dionysus is basically ordering them to tear it all down. It's called the so-called earthquake scene. And they sing of the palace falling down, and presumably they're dancing as well. And there are multiple ways that could be performed, and in some productions maybe nothing is made of it at all. But the chorus actually has the potential there to essentially perform the destruction that they're describing, and it's a sort of elemental moment. So that's actually another example of how flexible and powerful choral performance can be. But it's utterly different from a play like Orestes, where not only is there that scene where Electra's telling the chorus to be quiet, but later on in the play, the chorus starts trying to sing an ode. So it sings one stanza, And then suddenly it's interrupted because the so-called the Phrygian, an enslaved Phrygian character, one of Helen's attendants, comes rushing in and acts as a kind of alternative messenger by singing an incredibly long astrophic monody. And then a couple of hundred lines later, finally, the chorus is able to add the antistrophe to its initial strophe. So that's a sort of extreme flexibility. Bacchae seems, I mean, I actually think it's part of Euripides's great experimentation, and he's sort of archaizing with the Bacchae and thinking back to maybe what we might think, what his audience might think of as a more traditional tragic structure, but the chorus can still do some really powerful things.
Old and new at the same time, right? Holly, I see your
This
hand.
might sound stupid, but isn't I always thought, again, I haven't read the Bacchae since I was in my 20s, so it's been a long time. But as I remember, it seems that since the chorus since he is the god of song and dance, they're re-emphasizing it all the time. So they have him actually having the audience led on to the normalcy of what should be happening versus all the weirdness. Is that right? Am I making that up?
No, you're not making that up at all. No, that he is the god of song, dance, and theater, and
But the chorus there being kind of very active, and which I keep on remembering, the chorus is kind of giving you an idea of what's going on or what should be going on versus what is going on. Am I right? That's what I'm just remembering this.
Yes, I mean, I think, yes, they're showing what should be going on because they're being the sort of the ultimate Dionysiac chorus.
Right.
And that isn't so, and they're also kind of enacting on stage what the other chorus, quote unquote, is doing off stage in the mountains, who have been forced, have been maddened, and they've been made to worship Dionysus correctly. And even at one point in the messenger speech, Agave and her troupe are they're described as choruses. So the one on stage is performing what should be performed for Dionysus for sure. And their songs, are really unlike many in surviving tragedy, or certainly surviving Euripidean tragedy, where each one is basically a cult song for Dionysus, about Dionysus's birth. It's about all the sort of the ritual events, the song, the dance, the instrumental music that accompanies Dionysus. So actually, I really like your question because it sort of makes us.
Well,
it actually pushes go ahead.
Sorry, isn't it also just reinforcing how long Dionysus has been around? He's not a new god, as the chorus puts him. The newness is the weird Maenads. And remind me to tell you about the lamp I once made.
I will be in suspense about the
Unfortunately, I don't have it anymore, but it was very weird.
Could I say that the lamp was very gross? I still remember it, but I don't think we have it in the house anymore.
You guys are cracking me up. Okay, so hold on. We have another question by Aldo Patino, who is also another lovely guest that we have welcomed to our community previously. So Aldo, can you please ask your question?
Thank you. I was still thinking about the relation between the Homeric notion of Nostos and the arrival in Thebes. And whereas the Odyssey seems to construct presence through return, that is a kind of gradual movement from absence to presence. The Bacchae, the tragedy, appears to create presence through performance. And I think the chorus is physically in Thebes, but through song and dance, it makes Asia, Cithron, and overall the Dionysiac ritual spaces present. My question is, would you say that Euripidean musicae in the Bacchae offers a kind of alternative model of presence presence, let's say, based not on return, but on the performative coexistence of here and elsewhere, a performative exchange, negotiations, I say. That's my curiosity question about this dimension, this relation.
I love that question. Thank you so much, Aldo. Yeah, I think Euripides is especially interested in the power of choral song and dance to bring other spaces into the theatre. And you can see that across his plays. But I think you're right that in the Bacchae, it's particularly powerful. And in fact, it's a play about getting everybody singing and dancing across the world. And it begins with Dionysus saying, I've done it there, and now I'm here. And then it has the chorus also evoking other places, both sort of small locations and large, and all of it becoming present through their song and dance. Yeah, so I think that's actually just a beautiful way of putting it. But you put it not just in terms of making things present, but that is part of the sort of negotiation between the there and here.
Yes, I have that impression, and as you showed in your research, in your books, I think that that's the primary effect that the audience felt. Euripides, I think he wanted to construct a kind of environmental and performative participation in all of that. And it struck me particularly with the Bacchae from the very beginning.
Yes.
Echo.
Yes, and I've thank you. I've thought in the past a lot about sort of the average audience member in Athens in the late 5th century and how much choral experience they themselves would have. And I've drawn on dance studies in particular, where scholars of dance have coined the term kinesthetic empathy, the way in which a ballet dancer is going to relate much more strongly to a ballet performance than somebody who's never danced ballet before, that they actually have a bodily response, even while they're sitting still in the theatre and watching the dance on stage. And so that has prompted me to think a lot about the way an audience in this very different culture where be much more experience, not just of performing in a drama, in a dramatic chorus on stage, but in other choral performances, how they might then be brought in a much deeper way. And so that's another really nice dimension to what you're saying in terms of involving the audience in Athens or wherever else it's performed, the Bacchae is performed, in this performance that's taking place in the dramatic world in Thebes, but is also bringing together all these other aspects. And so we're all kind of dancing for Dionysus together.
Oh, I love that. I see a hand raised by Bill.
Speaking of audience participation, I wonder how much involved the audience was. I mean, the chorus is almost a function of the audience itself, but particularly with Orestes, there's legends about the audience's reaction throughout it.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder how much we don't have of. Was it Rocky Horror Picture Show of the age? I mean, was it
nice.
Regular response from the audience?
I love this question, in part because one of my missions when it comes to tragedy is not to think like we were led to think for so long that tragedy always involves a complete suspension of disbelief. With an audience that's utterly quiet, just watching this very somber play, which is obviously based on our on modern experiences of theatre, where we're in a darkened auditorium, and we're sort of conditioned to be quiet and not respond that much to the play. I think when we're dealing with open air theatres, everything changes, as anybody who's been to an open air performance even now would say. And within a festival, it's not just, you're not just going to a performance of a play by Euripides, but you're also taking part in a festival for Dionysus, in which you are likely to play some sort of festive part. So there's already that sort of level of engagement. But in terms of actually sort of evidence for then what the audience would do, we don't have very much. I love that you mentioned the Orestes. Yeah, so according to the life of Aeschylus, some women in the audience, when they saw the Eumenides, were so terrified when the Furies came on stage that they miscarried right there in the theatre. Who knows? The evidence we have for this is much, much, much later than when Aeschylus was around. It doesn't really matter whether it's true or not, whether there's any kernel of truth. The point is that it shows a sort of level of shock and bodily reaction, physical response that people knew was very possible. Another little more contemporary, perhaps, piece of evidence that I like thinking about is a play by Aristophanes. Aristophanes is Acharnians, which begins with the main character, Dicaeopolis, waiting for the assembly to begin. But it's very, very clear that it's equivalent to waiting for the play to begin and waiting for a tragedy to begin, because he talks about various tragedies being performed as if he's waiting for them to start. And he's really bored, and he sort of describes all of the things that he's distracted by, and it makes us think about an audience that's not always riveted by the stuff that's on stage, but has all kinds of other concerns going on, has an itch, or sort of writes some graffiti or whatever it is. His description of his affect, I think, is quite salutary. So again, no clear evidence, but I think we should resist the idea that these audiences are just sort of as if they're not there. I think they're, as you say, they're really part of these performances, and the chorus helps them to be part.
Naomi, thank you. That's a beautiful response. I'd like to take us back to your use of modern media in your podcast. And in this particular episode, one of the things that Lucy Jackson talks about is one of her favorite adaptations, which it was written by Maureen Duffy, who wrote an adaptation that was set in basically a public women's restroom. And Maureen Duffy just passed away a few days ago. I think on May 27th. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about why you think that modern adaptations are still so important and relevant. Like, what is it about an adaptation of the Bacchae set in a woman's restroom in which the women there see who they think is a man in the end, who's let's say an interloper of some kind, and things go horribly wrong, and it turns out that person was not a man. What do you think that these modern adaptations allow us to explore that we can't do solely with the ancient text?
Thank you for asking that question. So I'll first of all say that my use of adaptations of modern media is directly related to my teaching. So I teach a big general education course at Harvard called Tragedy Today. 185 students this semester. And that's also why I started the podcast with tragedy, both because tragedy's my wheelhouse, but also because I could do it concurrently with the teaching and sort of try out some of my interviews on my students. And the course is all about 21st century adaptations of Greek tragedy. And the experience of the classroom with people who are doing STEM and their first encounter with these ancient texts is that the ancient texts themselves are hard to sort of get into, but it's through thinking about how they've been adapted, whether it's questions of what is Asia, what is Asianness, which is very much there in the ancient play and can be explored in a completely different way in the context of Monica Youn's poem. But it's because of Monica Youn's poem that they then see that these questions, I can lead them to see that these questions are active in the play. It's through these adaptations that they find a way into these ancient and sort of deeply unfamiliar texts. And it's also through them that they find a sort of personal connection. So to give a few more examples of the sorts of adaptations that I talk about in that class when it comes to the Bacchae, there's one which was a mix of an onstage performance and an experimental film called Before Bacchae, and then Before Bacchae Before, which is a trans-centered production, which takes the sort of the trauma of the dressing scene and tries to make it less violent, less traumatic. And much more sensitive to trans experience. That can lead some people to think very differently about whether the Bacchae could be called a queer play in any sense or the opposite. So that's just one example. There's Dionysus in 69, which is maybe one of the most famous productions, adaptations of the Bacchae, performed in 1968 by a very young, produced by and directed by a very young Richard Schechner, and there's a Brian De Palma film of it. That can also lead students to think about degrees of maybe of queerness in particular, but certainly sexuality, also ideas of doubleness. Brian De Palma's film, you see the two, I don't know what the technical term is, but you see two images at once all the time. So if we're thinking about the extent to which Pentheus and Dionysus actually can be mirrors of each other, these cousins, the extent to which Dionysus is a god of doubling, just the experience of watching that film can encourage even those questions. So I've sort of gone from a sort of big answer to very specific examples to just give a sense of the connection that these adaptations can encourage when it comes to the ancient plays, especially, but by no means exclusively for a broader audience. I have learned so much from studying the reception of these dramas.
Okay, well, thank you so much. I just want to note that it's 1 o'clock, so we really do need to wrap up. Naomi, it has been such a delight to talk to you today about your podcast. I hope you'll come back and talk with us again. We really would love to keep our community in conversation with the work that you're doing. It's so valuable, and it's such a great opportunity. You're just opening up scholarship and conversation to so many people, and we really appreciate it. I just want to remind everyone that we're the New Alexandria Foundation, and our mission is to expand access to the study of the pre-modern world. And we are really interested in the comparative study of civilizations, both ancient and modern. So this is such a great fit with everything that we do. And we want to create engaging dialogues that really go on for generations. So thank you for joining us. If you're interested in learning more about the New Alexandria Foundation, you can find us online at newalexandriafoundation.org. And I hope you'll join us for our next New Alexandria Dialogue, which will be on Tuesday. It'll be a different day than usual, July 21st. We'll be in dialogue with the editors of the book Iran Amplified 100 Years of Music. And we are so excited to welcome them, and it's going to be a great conversation. So thank you so much to everyone. Thank you, Holly, Greg, Aldo, Mariana, Anna, Sarah, everyone who asked questions, everyone who just joined us. Bill, we really appreciate your time and effort in taking time to make some time for us today. So until next time, friends, see you soon.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It was great.